do more than making pretty things. Pretty is just what is pretty. So that might have an impact in terms of the full user journey overview and impact, because if you have a request for a specific screen or a specific part of the user journey, it's not just about, oh, let's just change this component or update the library. We have to make an assessment of how that change is going to affect the product in other areas, because we make an update on the design system that might break something else. We need to make sure that doesn't happen. Something else, we just need to roll out a few screens for a full feature, usually it's completely unrealistic. Can you get it done by the end of the week, which is in 3 days' time? No, it's not possible. Starts with the word just, nothing is just. If you have someone coming to you as a developer and say just, you're like, oh my God, just what's coming? We don't need design input. This is becoming popular. Our front-end developer has some pretty good ideas. Just a complete disregard of design expertise, obviously. Siloed thinking. You're not really thinking if you think like this, in my opinion. And obviously it's a poor team dynamic, because it just means that you're excluding someone as part of the product development. It's just not right. And it will have a negative impact on the product. Yeah, we built it, but 85% of users are dropping off, and we don't know why. This one is a lot of fun, looking into analytics, going back, having conversation with the engineering team, product management, what decisions were made or not made, and why. Why is it happening? Looking at analytics to understand what's broken in the journey. There's really stupid things sometimes, buttons that don't have like a hover behavior, or something moved on the screen because there was a change on the design system that the designer didn't sign off. So that affected how that sort of screen kind of was displayed to the user. I mean, there's all kinds of things that might happen, so it's very important to be aware that designers need to be part of the conversation, even if they don't have to design something, just to make sure that, because they know the product end to end, just to make sure that you're not missing out on something. Finally, so kind of like making a stop there, introducing Women in Design app, so kind of changing the subject a little bit. Women in Design app is a global Slack community of women in design that I founded 2 years ago during the pandemic. And it's basically, the mission is to upgrade the design industry's narrative to include women of all ages, life stages, race, job titles, years of experience, nationality, doesn't matter. Women designers have a really hard time overall, especially in the tech industry. We have so many barriers, so many hoops to jump through. Nothing comes easy. There's way less opportunities. There's lack of mentorship. And it's just, it becomes a problem because that has an exponential impact in terms of career development. And when you're not giving opportunities to learn and to grow and to be exposed to new environments and products and experiences, inevitably you stay behind, because you're not allowed to move. So basically this community, the goal is for us to share expertise across different countries. There's designers from all over the world, from the US and San Francisco. We have designers from Nigeria, South Africa. Sydney is amazing. We just support each other at all levels of career stages. We have design graduates, we have chief design officers, we have VPs of design, and it's just this sort of momentum of sharing expertise that we wouldn't get anywhere else, because no one allows us to do that. So that's Women in Design app. I'm just going to share, I'm almost done. Just going to share some of the things. When you join the community, you're asked sort of like, why are you joining? Sort of what kind of difficulties? If you could express it in a few words, why are you looking for a global Slack community of women in design? These are just some of the things that some of the women have written. Design is not a job for women. I don't know. I'm the only designer, I need more support, it gets lonely, the microaggressions are exhausting. This comes in terms of sometimes the idea of just being given the space to do the job sounds like a piece of heaven, because you're not included in meetings, you're not shared documentation, you're given less time to do the work, So there's a lot of small things on a day-to-day that add up, that make for a really poor experience, and sometimes it's really disheartening. I actually founded this community when I had such a hard time. I was actually considering leaving the design industry because it was so difficult. And I thought, I'm either going crazy or I'm not the only one. So, because we don't share, because you're very kind of, you're subtly sort of, if you share something, you're kind of given the impression that you don't get jobs, or you don't get work, or you don't get something else, so no one really speaks. I decided I'm gonna speak because I love design, I don't want to leave, and we're finding each other. We're hundreds of women designers together, it's amazing. Because I like to connect with more women in my field, which seems to be dominated with men. Nothing against men, all against women not having the opportunity to be up there with men. And to empower women in design careers, mentorship, and fellowship. That's it. That's my talk just in time. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, we'll just have a break and go and drink something.
Well, first of all, round of applause. I have a few questions. So first of all, how can you actually help women in design to integrate maybe like other corporate companies that want to either hire women in design or actually have the Slack channel part of their workspace? Slack channel, any details, how can you contribute?
Yeah, so there's a form that you can fill in if you're looking for design talent for women in design. That's shared across the whole network. Women are exposed to those opportunities, and if they're interested, they then get in touch with the recruiter or the hiring manager, and we'll just go from there. I don't think there's any women designers here, otherwise I would invite you to join, but if you know any women designers, please send them my way.
I just have a general comment.
Sure.
A year ago, 6 months ago, I hired a designer. And I wouldn't say dominated by men because I had mostly women who applied for the job, maybe 80%. So, and we hired a woman actually, a girl, I hope she doesn't feel like he described in our company. She's actually alone. There's a bunch of developers around her, but I hope she doesn't feel lonely, as you said. At the same time, I want to say that developers don't have it much better than designers, because basically, especially in tech companies, like everyone and me, myself, I go to developers and I say, you see, here's the bug. And I say others, we have good developers in the company. Here's a bug, you are, or like your team, you are doing so bad. And like, me, myself, and if I see a bug, I would complain to them first of all. So I know you are probably from a design background, and I think designers do have some complications, probably. But I don't think developers have it much better, actually.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a different, sometimes it's a different set of challenges. And my goal with the message today, it's not sort of designers have it really bad or developers have it really good. It's more to encourage that collaboration, because I've worked in amazing products, and when we work together, there's literally no limit to what we can accomplish, because you just start exchanging ideas and let's push this a bit further, and it's just such a wonderful experience, and we should have it more and more often. That's what I think. Yeah.
How does it work? What should someone do in order to join?
They just need to submit an application with their name and their portfolio, and then they join the community. We have different channels. We have things like negotiating salaries, which women are not allowed to do a lot. Things like tools, like design tools, career advice, interviews. We have a mom's channel as well. I mean, it's absolutely insane how women, when they get pregnant or kind of have children, it's mad. For many women, it's a career-ending event. It shouldn't be. so it's about that sort of support that no one else really gets it unless you go through it, and it's very real. It's not about mouthing anyone. It's more like, I have this problem. I have no idea what to do. Has anyone gone through this? And it's just sharing that knowledge, really. That's the whole point of, yeah. Any other questions?
I do. Well, thank you so much for sharing this, first of all. I do have a question. So, in product design, how do you work with the behavior-driven development process, which is more focused for the non-tech team, that, you know, the managers that want a feature and they don't know how to describe it? Do you implement that BDD into the product design, and or
I missed one word.
behavior-driven development, BDD? Behavior-driven development.
Yes.
Do you implement that in the design process with the non-tech team?
It honestly, and as ridiculous as it sounds, it really depends on the team and the composition of the team and the maturity of the team and the product. So it sometimes you have really basic challenges that you have to overcome to have a proper process, or you have to create one from scratch, really.
Okay, I have another question. Sorry. So a few years ago, we had a tech company. They do, it's kind of like the Photoshop for, you know, for apps, for pictures. They say that in their team, they have every 3 developers, either Android or iOS side, they have one product design. Because yeah, I was super shocked. And the reason they said is that they want to make sure, like, they don't have all these failures. And to me, it was shocking, because wow, they can afford to have so many different, and they had a big team, I think like 30, 40 people, so probably had at least 5, 6 people in product design. And yeah, I mean, what is your experience like? How many people do you get? You know, is that uncommon, or what do you usually do? One designer for the whole team for the product, or?
Yeah, in my experience, the smallest team I've had was 7 developers per designer.
Okay,
That's
still
the
good.
smallest. Usually it's around, obviously it depends on the company, the scale of the company, but you know, the highest, the biggest like gap I've had, I worked in an innovation department, tech and innovation department, and we had 90 developers and 2 UX and design leads, and I was one of them. So I was working on 5 different products. One of them was Oval, and yeah,
Wow.
it really depends.
I can see why it has 2 legs, the chair.
Yeah, but you know, at the end of the day, it's all about communication and really planning, you know, your roadmap properly, because you can manage if you have that sort of strategic approach to the product. Otherwise, it's just, you know, at some point you're like, just tell me what you need for this sprint, and we'll just do it and kind of see what happens next. And that's it. But I think that's the responsibility at senior management level, to allow the teams to have an environment where they can do the work properly, rather than just getting things out of the way, because every time you get things out of the way, you're breaking the product just a little bit more. And at some point, it will be so broken, it will either fail, or you'll just drag it out and people will leave, because you don't want to work in an environment like that. In my experience, from a design perspective, please.
So last question. So to improve this, do you think it's better to have the developers themselves voice more towards the management, or have the action be taken at the management level to make sure that, you know, there's more coordination with the product design?
I think it's
What is the problem lie? Is it top down or down?
I think ideally it should be top down, but there isn't the design presence at C-level and senior management level is practically non-existent, so that influence is just not there to raise awareness. So in reality, in practical terms, it works better if it's bottom up. And that's where the effort between engineers and designers and PMs really need to happen, because if that consistency is there, that coherence is there, there's nothing that senior management can do. And if that exists, that will have a positive impact on the product anyway, which is what everyone wants. So, yeah.
you've got like a lot of experience. And what would you say has been like your best, the best process, or the best experience you've had?
Yeah.
And my second question relates to like prototyping.
Yeah.
And how often you see it being used, because
Yeah.
I've like recommended it at pretty much every single place I end up working, and it's almost never used.
Yeah, it's awful. So the first question, the best experience that I've had. The best experience that I had was in this innovation company that I just mentioned, actually, because the heads of tech, PM, and me has in design UX. We kind of closed ourselves off in a meeting room for a couple of days, and we really went head to head in a healthy way, in terms of this is what we want to do, this is how ambitious we are, and we literally mapped out the whole roadmap and proposal to the CEO. We answered a lot of questions that they might ask. We needed a budget sign-off as well, quite a high budget, and we stress tested so much that the proposal, so we had one CEO and then we had the group CEO, which was the global CEO. And the product proposal was so good, it was signed off by both in a timeline of 2 weeks, which never happened before. And once that was done, basically every single person that was working on that product, everyone was aware of everything that was going on all the time. Even if we had two different sort of like split, because we then had pairings, like we assigned groups of engineers to certain parts of the product according to their expertise. And even if some teams weren't having a direct input on the product at that certain stage, they were well aware of what was happening and why. And that just allowed for everyone to, you don't focus on, am I missing something out? This doesn't make sense. It was all, I know what's going on, I know what's incoming, I'm already thinking how else I can contribute and push the product further. Which allows us to start talking about machine learning at some point, which had never come up for the product that we were designing. And that was just a bit of a dream. When people collaborate and when we share and when there's transparency and accountability, there's a lot of trust, and that gets injected into the product, and yeah, it's amazing. Prototyping, that's an interesting subject. It depends. From a design perspective, you prototype with different purposes. You might have to put together a quick prototype just to show the CEO how the product is going to work. We have to make it very clear that they're mock-ups, they're screens, it's not an existing product. The same with salespeople. They like a lot to kind of, can I just show it to someone? It's like, no. It's not built, people can have it yet. So that's that side of prototyping. Other side of prototyping is testing, user testing. That might be low wireframes prototyping or hi-fi wireframes prototyping. Lo-fi wireframes, usually it's early stages of research with any sort of learnings that we have from existing data, any assumptions that we want to test. Sometimes using dark patterns and journeys to see sort of like how is the user going to resolve that? Is it like a complete blocker? After that, when we have some information and we make some product decisions in terms of the research that we've done, the testing that we've done, we then have high-risk prototyping if we want to follow up in terms of, A/B testing at prototyping stage. But I mean, that's really rare because most of the time companies don't really want to spend the money and the time doing that, unfortunately. They just want to ship stuff out. Done is better than perfect. Sometimes that works really well. Other times that's a massive mistake. The CEO will take the flak for that at some point, so that's okay. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious, like, how often do you see, like, prototyping being used? Because you always hear from, like, all these, like, all the best companies with the best products, Dyson, Apple, BMW, all these guys, they take prototyping seriously, and it seems to be, like, makes them possible to get other organizations to take it on.
I think it really depends. From my experience, like if you have a product that you have a good user base, Usually, CEOs and chief product officers, they tend not to care as much with that because it's they're getting users, so it's kind of like it's working. They're getting their milestones accomplished, so just they prefer to take it slow but accomplish the milestones than risk it too much. For example, I worked in a startup that had just come out of incubation. They got around the funding, they launched to market. I joined, the company has the only designer to kind of take that off, start building a design team, developing features, etc. And we did quite a few bits of research, like user interviews and user testing, mostly to understand, because it was a kind of product that doesn't really exist in the market. So there were a lot of unknowns, there were a lot of assumptions, but a lot of unknowns as well. And the two weren't really balanced. There was a lot of areas that you couldn't feel, oh, it's an assumption, but I feel that might work. So in that case, we did a lot of user interviews, then we did prototypes, then we did user testing. And that was really good. It informed us about 2 new features that I then designed later that actually gave the product a competitive edge because it just doesn't exist in the market. So again, it goes back to that sort of, you have to negotiate quite a lot in terms of things that you have to consider, like what's the timeline, what's the cost in terms of effort and risk, how much time you have to test or not, what is the impact if you don't, what's the impact if you do. So there's a lot of negotiation to do, and again, the best results come out when you have engineering, design, product management, and business in the conversation. I'd say that's absolute key. Any other questions? Yes?
Got one question. So I've seen some tech companies like Spotify, they've got squads and they've got an engineering manager, designer, QA, and some developers.
Yeah.
What do you think of that sort of approach?
Do you mind, sorry, I just got distracted by the door. Do you mind repeating
Yeah,
that?
sure. So some of the bigger tech firms, they have squads, and sometimes in the squads it'll be a designer, QA, and developer, and they will
Yeah.
report to this manager. Do you think that's the right way of doing it? Should there be a kind of head of design or?
It depends. It depends, because when you go to, it depends on the scale. If you have a small startup, it's a completely different dynamic from a big company that's, the scale of the product is so big that you have dedicated teams to specific areas of the product that it's impossible to have awareness of the whole product, right? So probably works better in bigger companies when you have a focused item, probably at micro level that you're working on, because it just allows you to move faster. And whatever you do is not going to really impact on other areas of the product. So if that doesn't work, that's okay because it's controlled. If you're doing that at a smaller stage, like at startup stage, everything you do might break the product. So you can't really have people working in sort of semi-isolation, developing something if you're not communicating with the rest. I mean, it's usually 10 people anyway when it's at early stages. So.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering if you're in that scenario then you talk about learning from others, that kind of, you might not get that opportunity.
Yeah. That's kind of unraveling a whole other conversation, because let's say you have a company that has 3-4 squads, let's say. They usually have more, but 3-4 squads. Some companies don't share the knowledge and the learnings when those squads develop a piece of work. And that means that whatever is found, when it's not shared, it means that it gets lost. Which means at some point another squad, even if they're working in a different feature, because they don't have that learning, they might do the same mistakes. So one of the things that I do when I'm working with my teams, again, transparency, accountability, that develops trust. It's always to annotate the learnings. We have design PRDs, we have post-design reviews when something is launched, we have shared documentation where all the learnings are annotated. And that just allows for people to kind of speed up and okay, we know that this doesn't work. Is there anything else to explore here, or is that completely aside and we can try something else? Because it kind of builds up, right? It kind of builds up on the next piece of work. There's a lot of value that gets lost in companies when teams don't do that. I don't know if that answered your question. Kind of
Yeah,
did.
it did.
Not 100%.
No, it did.
70, 80.
85.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Okay, maybe just one question.
Sure.
You mentioned you shouldn't ask a designer to design a couple of screens in 3 days. Obviously, there are different types of screens.
Yes.
But what do you think is the appropriate way to ask a designer to design 2 screens to an existing?
Yeah. So obviously this is kind of like a generic comment because you might have a lot of different contexts. If you have a design system, like a mature design system in place, and you're making changes to a particular screen, that shouldn't be a problem. But if there's a new feature and you have to design new components, or you have to think, is this part of an existing user journey? Is this a separate user journey that we do? You have to ask all of those questions before you actually go into the screen stage. That sort of comment, that's the purpose of the comment. Can you just do a few screens? It's like, what are the screens about? What are they for? Why is this request coming in? And you need to have that sort of understanding and ask those questions, and then you do the work. Because when you put something together, it's without any context, that spells disaster at some point. You don't want to do that.
I guess with designers, it's easy to assume that you just paint something. I guess most of the people do that.
Yeah.
I still do. Yeah.
It's the first place where a good designer, the first place where their mind goes is, what's the purpose of this request, and how does it fit with the whole product? So you don't think, even if it's 3 screens for a particular area of the product, the first thing is just zoom out and kind of see how that bit fits within the whole product, and make an assessment. Is this something that we can actually do and it really just takes 3 days? Or this is going to change the journey, which will then change other journeys in the product and sort of have an interference with that. So it's just being mindful of, it's not just, every time the word just comes in, you kind of do like the defense card, it's like just, scratching your ears. Any other questions?
Cool. Then thank you so much, Anna, once again. And let's take a 20 minutes break, grab a drink, toilet break, and then Gabriel's gonna present on Kotlin, and yeah, see you in 10 minutes.